So now, the last of these individual constraints, as I talk about them, is going to be expression. We talked about perception, bringing information into our brain. We talked about intellection, what it is we do with it there. We take the data and we make different things. And then we talked about expression, which we're going to talk about now, which is getting our ideas back out in the world. And so the problem here is that we really have to get our ideas out so that other people can see them. And some of the constraints we may have, some of the problems we have within expression are we may not have an idea expression language. We may not be able to have a language for how we express ideas. Our vocabulary, the words and the symbols that we use to communicate may be very limited. And there are also miscommunication problems that are very predictable and routine and ones that we can overcome. Let's talk a little bit about why it is important to express our ideas. If you're able to articulate your ideas, you're able to actually articulate not only for other people, but for yourself. And by articulating it for yourself, you can test the idea. You can write down the idea and say, well, let me look at that and see, does that make sense? That doesn't make sense. Okay, well, let me try something different. Would that work? Well, no, it doesn't look like there'd be a little problem here. And so by being able to test our ideas is really, really important. We don't have to just have an idea and then go give it to someone else just to find out it doesn't work. We can test it for ourselves. And then again, we can also gain support for ideas. So if I have an idea and it's a good idea, I want to get support for it, I have to be able to explain it to other people in a way that they understand, in a way that they're able to say, wow, that is something that makes sense to me. The kinds of visual languages, so if you look at pictures like these, like what do they say? What's the sort of the underlying emotion that's given by the picture? What kind of information is given by the picture? Even the style of drawing that we're using here in these slides has a certain kind of language. There's a certain kind of way that it is conveying information to you. So you want to think about that. The sufficiency of vocabulary, so people have insufficient vocabularies, they don't have enough words, they don't have enough ways of expressing things. Sometimes there's a problem of buzzwords, that people use these buzzwords and they say, like the word profit or the net, or let's get to the bottom line, or those kind of terms really don't say very much, they're just cliches. They may feel good to say and you may feel like you're important by saying them, but you're really not communicating. You're not communicating something deep and articulate in that way. And so, that's the problem. We have this. People say, we're going to profit from this. What do you mean by profit? Profit has very, very, very many different meanings, and meanings that we'll want to explore. For example, if you're an engineer and you're working on some structural features, there's words, for example, words like apron or canard, or words like a flange. These kind of words they have very specific meaning. And for engineers talking to each other, mechanical engineers who are building a structure, this is very important kinds of information for them, that they can actually communicate much more quickly and articulately around using these kinds of words. And here's some more too for fastening. I was taken once by a good friend of mine who's a math professor here at Vanderbilt, and he came over one day. He knows that I enjoyed Legos and that I had done some work for the Lego company, and he brought me this magazine, which was the Mathematicians, the Society of Mathematicians Journal, and there was a special issue on Lego. And this issue was about topologists, so people who study the topology mathematically, and how they were using Lego to sort of think through some of their problems. It's kind of interesting because it's a little bit hard for them to admit that they're using shapes. So if I'm looking at a 4 and 5 and 6 dimensional shape, and mathematically that's easy to do, but in terms of building it in Lego, it's very difficult to do. So they're helping themselves think through by actually expressing their ideas using the Lego. I thought that was a very interesting thing for mathematicians to sort of acknowledge that they're using these tools to try to visualize, to try to understand what it is about these mathematical equations and how it is that they would look. The last one of these I want to talk about is communication errors. That is, when we try to talk to people, but we run into errors. We have problems with that. So one kind of error we have is consensus. Well, it's not an error. It's actually when it works. Consensus is when I have a certain idea, I use a certain terminology to express that idea, you understand that terminology, and you're able to translate that back into the idea. So we have consensus. Correspondence is a problem where we have a disconnect there, where we're using the same word, but we mean different things by that. And so we have an idea, and we're using the same word, and that's problematic. We may have conflict, that is where we're using different words, and we have the same idea, and we're thinking of them in different ways. We might call that when people are in violent agreement, that becomes a problem. And we have contrast where people just cannot communicate, where they have ideas and they have language, but those language does not translate across. And when we're talking to people, when we're thinking about expressing our ideas, we might think about these things. How is that we achieve consensus? What kind of language are we using? Are we in danger of getting correspondence or conflict or even contrast by not thinking through how we're going to express our ideas to other people? So these expression constraints, lack of idea expression language, limited vocabulary, these problems of miscommunication, I think they're ones that we can actually overcome. So after the quiz, we're going to talk about how to overcome these constraints. Overcoming expression constraints, here's some things we're going to do. Remember, the constraints are lack of idea expression language, limited vocabulary, miscommunication. What can you do? Hopefully it's pretty obvious that some of these things we can do. We can actually become very good at drawing. So here's a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, Vitruvian Man. This drawing, Leonardo made the claim, the implicit claim, that the human body grows with these body ratios as a Fibonacci sequence. You can do a little bit more research on that if you're interested, but basically he was saying that the ratio of human body parts goes as a very, very specific structure. It's a very hard idea to refute if you can't draw as well as Leonardo, because when you look at it and you look at those measures on there, it looks pretty good. It looks like a person, it looks like the ratios are right, and so I sort of have to believe it. And so if you think about it, Leonardo probably didn't work in a vacuum. In fact, he would have all kinds of secret ways of writing because he didn't want people stealing his ideas. And so that we found notebooks and things where he writes backwards or writes in mirror or has these secret codes. So he didn't want other people to steal his ideas. So there were other people around who were having ideas maybe similar to his. The problem is that those other people, they couldn't draw and they couldn't express their ideas as well as he could. And so, hundreds of years later, it's Leonardo stuff we're looking at, not the other people's stuff, because he was able to express his ideas in a very articulate way. We want to develop new ways of talking. Again, get rid of the cliches. Don't talk in cliches. Really try to be articulate. So just challenge yourself to not say, the net or profit or words like that. And even in your own language, what those words are. When you hear business people talking, they're just using the words to use them. They're not really expressing something. Try to truly communicate. Like, get down to really what you're actually trying to say. And don't be afraid to say, wait, I don't understand that. Can you please say that differently? And that will force people sometimes to take the cliche out. If they ask to say something differently, then they maybe get to a better place of explaining to you what it is that they're trying to convey. Another thing is learn to draw. Learning to draw is actually very easy. And the goal here is not to be another Leonardo. You don't have to be a Leonardo. What you need to be is a competent visual communicator. You want to be able to visually communicate your ideas to other people. So if you're standing at a board in your office and you're drawing things up there, you want people to understand that, because you want them to understand your ideas. And if they reject your ideas, you want them to reject them because they're not appropriate ideas. You do not want them to reject them because you couldn't explain them very well. And that would be a shame, right? That would be bad. That would be suboptimal. And a really big one here, and this is, I think, is probably, if you don't take anything else from this course, take this one, that you have to sell your ideas. Remember, the obligation's on you. It's not on the people who you want to change. Those people who are out there and who you think need to behave differently, there's no obligation for them to do that just because you had an idea. If you have the idea, you have to explain to them, you have to sell them, you have to make sure that they want your idea, that they want to change their lives around your idea. And so that's when products are successful, when changes are successful, when social ideas are successful, is when people look at them and say, wow, that makes sense to me. That's something that would make me better. That's something that would make my life easier. That's something that would make the world a better place. And so again, you have to sell your ideas to people because you can't just push them on it. Having an idea, even if you think it's a good idea, even if it is a good idea, creates no obligation on people to accept that, to change their lives around that idea. Because remember, your ideas represent risk. And anyone who accepts your risk without understanding it is a fool. And so you don't want to be that fool either. Work doggedly hard. Work really hard on presentations when you're presenting. Again, hopefully there's a theme emerging here that you understand, that we really have to work hard on presenting our ideas to other people. Because if we want them to understand them, if we want them to test them, if we want them to change their lives around ideas, we have to work hard on getting those ideas across. And working hard on our presentations, thinking about, well, I know I have calculated these numbers in a spreadsheet, but that doesn't mean you should put a spreadsheet up on the wall, if you're trying to explain something. Maybe it has to be explained with a picture. Maybe it has to be explained with a drawing. And always, sometimes if you took a photograph of something, maybe that needs to be explained in words. really think through, what is it that people need to understand this idea? What's the best way of communicating this idea? And then work towards that. Don't just open PowerPoint and start typing in there in that way. So, individual constraints, perception constraints, bringing information in. Intellection constraints, how we think things through. Expression constraints is getting our ideas back out. And those are the basic ones. Well, actually, there's two more that I want to talk about, just briefly.